We're going to have a chance in a few minutes to break into breakout rooms and talk to each other, but not before we hear from Carolyn Custis James, talking to us this morning about patriarchy and power. Carolyn is an international speaker and an award-winning author. She speaks at church conferences and colleges and for other Christian organizations across the United States and abroad. And her work centers on biblical studies and focuses on the intersection between Christianity and 21st century cultural issues facing women and men. Carolyn, thank you so much for teaching us this morning.
Thank you. Well, I'm glad and grateful to be part of this. My topic is patriarchy, and this is a deeply personal subject for me. I grew up in the church. My father was a pastor, and it was a benevolent patriarchal context. I wasn't rebellious. I loved the church. I loved what I was learning, and it didn't it didn't offend me at all. I bought into the whole thing. But when I graduated from college, I hit a stretch of singleness that I didn't see coming. And as a woman, my fulfillment was supposed to be in marriage and motherhood, and instead, I'm renting an apartment for one and starting a job in another state. And it was a time of deep but very important struggle, having been taught that that's what God calls women to be and do, to be wives and mothers. And it leaves out so much of our lives and so much of our stories. And I had to really work through some things. I ended up asking lots of questions about what it means to be a woman in God's purposes. And the patriarchal teaching wasn't giving me very good answers. And what it did was it drove me to Scripture and to the narratives of women in the Bible. And those women's stories were life-changing for me. It became more a question of stewardship than anything else. That, one day I'll stand before Jesus. What am I going to say I did with my life and the opportunities he gave me? The women in the Bible the ones I studied had interesting men in their stories. And those women led me to look more deeply at the stories of men. And their stories compelled them to shed patriarchy's demands on them and to embrace a brand of masculinity that looks a lot like Jesus. And those men compelled me to do something I never thought I would do, and that was to re-examine patriarchy. The book I wrote, where my research shows up, is called Maelstrom, and it's the second edition that brings this book up to date because it pulls in some of the other things I'm going to talk about. It's no secret today that the American church, the American Evangelical church, is in deep trouble. There are fierce, toxic divisions that are raging over social issues and American politics, and church exit doors are swinging open and numbers are declining. In 2017, we had the Me Too Church to Twitter storms, and that confronted the church with serious abuses that are going on inside, that continue to go on to this day, where evangelical leaders and pastors of other denominations are abusing their congregants. And it was hard evidence that we had to face that abuse and violence were being inflicted, not just in the outside culture, but inside the church. And evangelical church leaders were caught off guard. They said, we thought this was a Roman Catholic problem, but it turned out to be every bit as big in the evangelical church. Victims were mistreated, disbelieved, shamed, and shunned, pressured to forgive and forget and move on. The world witnesses multiple prominent evangelical leaders to this day that are being convicted of sexual abusing their congregants. And there have been many members of the church, leaders, colleagues of these abusive men that have covered up for them and protected them. It led Rachel Denhollander, who is a leader in combating sexual abuse against women and girls, to say that the church is not a safe place. In the wake of Me Too and Church Too, experts and survivors produce vital resources for the church to enlighten leaders on how to respond to this violent pandemic inside the church without making things worse. Over time, we have watched interest dwindle in this crisis. There was a big effort at first, and there was a lot of reluctance even then to talk about all of this. So crucial, unfinished work remains. We may have lots of better understanding of how to treat someone when they step forward with allegations, that these allegations must be taken seriously, that we need to use the expertise of law enforcement and therapy, trauma therapy counselors. But the job is not finished. We have a bigger problem that remains. If we learned anything from the COVID pandemic, it's that the battle isn't over until you find the virus and kill the problem at the source. And this raises major theological problems for the church. In 2006, the Me Too avalanche happened in 2017, but in 26, the United Nations Secretary General, released a report on violence against women in the world, and the report named patriarchy as the root cause of violence against women. This raises major theological problems for the church. The Bible emerges from an intensely patriarchal culture. Patriarchy is on nearly every page of the Bible. God chose patriarchs to move his purposes forward for the world. Patriarchy, or father rule, centers on and empowers men, empowers them over women and children, and also over other men. It also shapes much of our church theology, which means that the theology that we all have embraced may be contributing to the abuse that is happening to this day in the church. We need to always remember that theology is a human construct. It's a work in progress. It's never finished. It's not perfect. And we always have corrections to make and more to learn. So it's both responsible and important for us to be asking, are we creating this vulnerability when we teach young girls and women that the Bible's watchwords for them are silence and submission? Does our theology for men and boys pressure them to be tough and take charge? Or does it point to Jesus as the role model for masculinity? How does the church teach about leadership and power? Are we enabling abuse in private homes as well as in the church itself? Are we asking why it doesn't seem to matter whether abusers are complementarians or egalitarians? How is that possible? My research convinced me that patriarchy was never God's plan for humanity, and that the Bible dismantles it. There are 4 dismantling forces that I want to talk about. And the first is the fact that our Creator dismantles patriarchy before it ever starts. In Genesis 1 and 2, we see that God is in charge, that this is his story, that he is launching his kingdom on earth. And we are standing on the threshold of human history, and the Bible doesn't leave us guessing whose world this is or who stands at the center. If we miss this one point, everything will be off center. Any discussion of what it means to be human begins here. Every other text of Scripture must be subjected to the scrutiny of the blueprints God reveals in the beginning. And there are 3 powerful statements he makes about human beings. The first is that he creates us to be his image bearers. And we have looked at this in very trivial ways, but it is the most incredible thing a human being can know about themselves. It means that we are created to be like God, to know the God who created us and to embrace and emulate his heart. It means that each of us have responsibility for God's reputation in the world. We participate in divine revelation as we reflect our Creator. We represent him. We speak and act for him. His reputation is on the line in how we interact with one another. He created human beings to rule outward over creation, not over each other. It is an implicit call to leadership that is grounded in the fact that we are the Imago Dei, made in the image of God. And our mission is to explore, cultivate, utilize, and steward Earth's resources, not to govern over one another. It raises the fact that any abuse of a human being is a direct assault against our Creator himself. We are created in his image. But second, God brings male and female together at creation to be a blessed alliance, to serve him together. They are his A team in getting his work done in the world. He's launching the most ambitious enterprise ever imagined, and the team he commissions to do the job is male and female, which just escalates the damage that is being happened in the church, where women are being marginalized and pushed aside, and women and girls and boys and a lot of men as well are being mistreated and abused. The blessed alliance between male and female is one of the boldest countercultural concepts that's presented in the Bible. And it's not, wouldn't it be nice if men and women could get along better? But that this is God's kingdom strategy. the best way to do his work in the world is for us to do it together. No second of our lives or square inch of earth is beyond its scope. And God is always the center, the reference point for who we are and how we are to interact with one another and the work we are to do in God's world. Even the secular culture is beginning to understand this. After we had the major financial crisis in 2008, Lehman Brothers were saying, would we be in this mess if we had been Lehman Brothers and sisters? If anyone still misses the point, Genesis 2 drives it home. That's where we read that it is not good for the man to be alone. And God says, I will make a helper, the word azer, suitable or connecto for him. God isn't fixing the man. He is saying that this is what the man needs, that men and women need each other to be the best image bearers they can be and to do his work in the world. So this is not the creation of marriage. This is the creation of the female. Every girl child born in the world is the Ezer Connecto. The Ezer is a word that is used most in the Old Testament for God as the helper of his people. It's used in a military context. The Ezer is a helper that is needed by her brother. And Eden already was a war zone because there was an enemy plotting an attack that would break things apart right at the beginning. God mobilized his daughters, the Ezer, to bring her full self to the shared mission that he had put before humanity. And according to God, men need the Ezer Connecto, which just makes it worse that there is all this abuse and trauma going on. And even in the beginning, before we witness a single moment of unfallen image bearer living, a single blow from the enemy cuts humanity off from our Creator and divides us from one another. Genesis 3 isn't unveiling a new and improved social order. This is the prophetic announcement of a total collapse. God's kingdom strategy has been dismantled and patriarchy is born. Father rule empowers men over women, children, and also other men. The patriarchy we witness in the Bible is a system where sons are prized and daughters don't count. Women's value is measured by counting their sons. A woman with no sons is a zero in the Old Testament. Women have no legal rights, no agency, no voice. There is widespread slavery and polygamy, violence and war. The Ezer warrior recedes in the story from Genesis 3 on. Only 10% of biblical characters are female. And the Bible becomes a predominantly male story. We have read these texts over and over. They have been preached to us. This is one of the main reasons patriarchy is so strong in the church. But God dismantles it by the blueprints he sets before us at creation. The book of Genesis dismantles patriarchy. Primogeniture is established as patriarchy's linchpin. Under primogeniture, the rights of the firstborn son dominate the family. A man must have a son to be a true important person in the community. And his firstborn is like the crown prince. This son will rise to leadership in the family. He will be given status and power over his brothers and his sisters. Not only that, But when his father's inheritance is distributed to his sons, the firstborn son gets twice as much as the rest of his brothers. Genesis documents the deadly effects of this ranking system. I call Genesis warring brothers. Patriarchy is a relentless battle to the top, a battle to rise to supremacy over others. And Genesis documents the deadly effects of this ranking system. God doesn't conform to patriarchy's rules. He overthrows primogeniture and patriarchy with it. He chooses son number 2, Abel, not number 1, Cain. He chooses Isaac, not Ishmael. Jacob, not Esau. Among Jacob's 12 sons, Jacob chooses number 11, and God chose Judah, number 4. By the time Genesis ends, patriarchy is dismantled at its heart. The dismantling doesn't stop with Genesis, but runs right through the Bible. God chooses Jesse's son, number 7, to be Israel's king. God raises up women to advance his kingdom purposes: Hagar, Deborah and Jael, Ruth and Naomi, Esther, Mary of Nazareth, Mary of Bethany, Mary Magdalene. Patriarchy is a fallen, destructive social system that violates God's blueprint and his image in humanity. But patriarchy is still important. Patriarchy is not the Bible's message, and we must shed it as the Bible's message. It is the fallen cultural backdrop, though, that sets off in the strongest relief the radical nature and potency of the Bible's gospel message. As Americans, we study the Bible at a huge disadvantage because the Bible is not an American book. We need to understand the cultural context of the biblical story to get to the heart of the story and to understand the true message. So God's blueprint destroys patriarchy. The book of Genesis takes it to pieces. Even the Apostle Paul is a patriarchal dismantler. His mission is to take Jesus and his gospel into the first century Gentile world. Full-fledged patriarchy dominates that culture. Powerful men rule over powerless wives, children, and slaves. But Paul writes in a letter to a mixed audience of Gentiles, men and women and slaves, and says in Galatians 3:26, you are all sons in Jesus Christ. English translators have changed the translation for the sake of inclusiveness to say, you are all sons and daughters, or you are all children of God. Patriarchy alerts us to the revolutionary nature of what Paul is saying, because in God's family, you are all sons. Jesus is the last one in the Bible who embodies what God intended at creation and overthrows patriarchy. He is the perfect imago Dei, the image of the invisible God, and the exact representation of his being. Jesus died for this, to embody and rebuild God's original creation vision, to reconnect God's people with their creator, to build that blessed alliance, a bone-deep, God-centered, mission-minded church Jesus-shaped alliance that requires everything we all have to offer. We need to put patriarchy in its place as the backdrop and not the message of the Bible, and get to work studying those blueprints.